everybody, it's Miss Amanda here to say that I miss you and I'm really excited to talk to you today about surrealism. I don't know about you, but for the past couple months, life has felt pretty surreal. Surreal is when something feels familiar, but also bizarre and strange and impossible and dreamlike at the same time. Think of the latest dream you've had that you can remember. You were probably in a pretty familiar, normal place, maybe your home or school or the grocery store, but then something kind of strange probably entered your dream at some point. Maybe strange and fantastical creatures or characters from your favorite book entered your dream. Maybe you were able to fly or breathe underwater. Maybe somebody who you know in your dream, like your mom or your friend, changed into somebody else you know in the middle of your dream. That strange feeling that our dreams have is sort of what we mean when we say surreal. There is a whole art movement based on this idea of the surreal. That art movement is called Surrealism. And this is the type of artwork that we're going to learn about and make in our lesson today, Surrealist artwork. So let's take a look at some famous Surrealist artwork before we get started.
Surrealism is a movement that was started by artists and writers about 100 years ago in the 1920s. These artists decided that they were not interested in making things that were logical or realistic or that made sense. They were much more interested in the nonsensical, in unleashing their imaginations and all of the thoughts and feelings that are deep inside our brain, thoughts and feelings that we are not even aware of, we don't even know about. This is called our subconscious. And surrealists were very interested in our subconscious thoughts. These are the thoughts that many people believe are unleashed during our dreams, which is why our dreams can be so strange and bizarre. They don't follow the normal rules and logic of our brain. Perhaps one of the most famous surrealist artists was the Spanish artist Salvador Dali. You might recognize this very famous Salvador Dali painting called The Persistence of Memory. Now, this is a pretty strange picture, and one technique that artists like Dali used to make their art seem more surreal is combining objects, places, and subjects that don't really seem to go together. They don't make sense together. Why are there clocks all over this desert? Why are they melting? What is this strange creature in the middle of the picture supposed to be? And what are all these ants doing on this pocket watch? We can make all kinds of guesses about what these objects mean and why Salvador Dali put them there. But one thing is for sure, it is certainly a strange and bizarre collection of items that we wouldn't usually find together in reality, though we might find them together in a dream. Surrealists like Salvador Dali were often really inspired by dreams. As you can tell from one of my favorite Salvador Dali paintings, this picture of a ship that has giant butterflies instead of sails. Or these funky looking elephants that Salvador Dali painted on a bright sunset background. I don't know about you, but I've never seen an elephant like this in real life. Look at how Salvador Dali has stretched out the legs of all of the elephants so that they're really tall and spindly, almost like a spider's legs. This would never hold up an elephant in real life. And we can call this type of drawing distortion. Distortion is basically where an artist draws something a little bit funky. This is another technique or strategy that surrealists would sometimes use to make their pictures look more strange and dreamlike. They might stretch or melt or distort the objects that they were drawing to make them look a little bit off kilter, kind of like the melted clocks we saw in the first painting. Dali did this a lot when he painted animals. He would stretch out parts of their bodies. Sometimes in surrealism, the things that the artist is drawing are totally normal, like a man in a suit hanging out in the city. But what makes them strange is how the figures or the objects are interacting with the setting or the space. Like in this painting by the famous surrealist Rene Magritte. Instead of having the man walk down the street or stand in front of his house in a really normal way, Magritte has used repetition to make this painting strange and surreal by repeating the figure over and over again so that it almost looks like these men are raining down on the rooftops or floating around in the sky. Sometimes surrealist artists choose strange, eerie, or even spooky backgrounds and settings to make their art seem more surreal and strange. Like in this painting, also by Rene Magritte, where the setting is almost a little too quiet. Surrealists use all different kinds of styles and mediums or materials to make their artwork. Drawing, painting, even found object sculpture like this lobster phone by Salvador Dali. Yeah, remember what I said about how surrealists like to combine things that don't really go together? That's lobster phone. Salvador Dali found two unrelated objects and combined them together to make this sculpture. Surrealists loved making absurd, imaginative, and even silly combinations like this one. Collage is another medium that lots of surrealists use. For collage, an artist cuts out different images or textures, often from magazines or newspapers, and they glue them together to make a work of art. These are some examples of surrealist collages by the artists Joseph Cornell and Hannah Ha. Collage was a great medium for surrealists because they wanted to have less control over what they made. Instead of all of the thinking and planning and reasoning that we usually put into the things we make, surrealists wanted to see what would flow automatically and freely from their imagination without even thinking about it. Collage added some chance and randomness to the combinations and creations they could make with the images they just stumbled upon. Surrealists did all sorts of things to try to get rid of all of their control and logical thinking from their artwork. They made automatic drawings or unplanned doodles like these. They even invented special drawing games to play with each other, where each person would take turns adding to a drawing without being able to see what the other players had added. This led to really strange and unlikely combinations like the examples here. Surrealism started 100 years ago, but it is still going on today. There are lots of artists who are influenced by surrealism, like our own Seattle artist Casey Weldon, or painters like Inka Essenhigh and John Brosio. Today, we also see a lot of surrealist artwork from digital collage artists like Karen Lynch and Julia Geiser. Now that you have become an expert on surrealism and looked at examples from famous surrealist artists, it is your turn to make a surrealist work of art. We're going to use drawing, collage, and whatever other art medium you want for our surrealist artwork. We're also going to use a special recipe for surrealism based on the techniques and strategies we've seen in our example artworks today. We're going to make it dreamy. We're going to use odd combinations. We're going to draw things funky or distorted. We're going to try to find strange, spooky settings. We're going to try to leave things up to chance, and most of all, we're not going to overthink it. We're going to see what flows from our imagination. We talked a little bit about how some surrealists use collage as a medium for their artwork. So my first step is to look through magazines, newspapers, catalogs, ads, and
any scraps of paper I have lying around to cut out things that are interesting to me. I'm not thinking that much about how these items relate to each other or what they're gonna mean. I'm just cutting out things that are interesting to me. Remember that the point of surrealism is to leave things up to chance, leave it to your subconscious, to your imagination, let things flow freely. I am thinking a little bit about the sizes of the objects I'm cutting out so that they can fit into my collage space and to have some large things, some small things. I'm cutting out objects and figures. In art, figures are the people or animals or creatures in a work of art. Now that I've cut out some figures and objects from magazines, it's time to try drawing some figures of my own. This is a great chance to try out drawing things funky or distorted, just like Salvador Dali. So I'm drawing inspiration from that elephant picture of his that we saw by drawing some elephants and creatures with long, stretched out legs, making them look a little bit strange and otherworldly. I also decided to draw some giant sea creatures. I really embellished the size of these sea creatures to make them seem more fantastical and bizarre than the sea creatures we would see in normal life. I'm also drawing a dog with 8 legs to make him a little more unusual. This is also an opportunity for us to try out odd combinations. Here I've drawn a flower vase, and the flowers are a little bit funky. They have eyeballs and noses and stuff. There's also a doorway on the vase that shows stairs and sort of a house inside. So I've made all kinds of figures to populate my project with. In addition to figures, I also made a few buildings and structures. I don't know that I will even use all of them, but I'm going to add a little bit of gray to add some value and shading to these drawings, and then I will cut them out, kind of like I did with my magazine clippings. I'm trying to cut as close as I can to those figures to get all the extra white space and chunks of background out from around it. I want to even cut out any spaces in between and in the middle of the figures that I made so that I can place them in a different background later. Now that we have all of the figures for our work of art, it's time to start making the ground. You can also call this the setting or the stage. If this is the stage, all of the figures we cut out are like the actors that we're going to place in our scene. I began with my horizon line. That is the line where the sky meets the ground. Sometimes horizon lines are straight. Mine is not, because I have sort of a rocky, mountainous landscape for my ground. After I made my horizon line, I sketched in some of these rock formations, and I also added a road that winds from the foreground to the horizon line. Next, I started using my dark pencil to add lots of shading to create the rocky corners and edges of my landscape. Now, your drawing should come from your own mind and imagination. So your ground might not look anything like mine. It might be a very different type of landscape, like a forest. It might not be a landscape at all. It might be a cityscape with buildings. Perhaps it doesn't take place outside. Perhaps your picture is inside a room or a house. Maybe it's underwater. Maybe it's in outer space or in the sky. It is totally up to you. Just start drawing and see where your thoughts and imagination take your pencil. Just make sure you use a large-ish drawing space, like a paper or maybe even a piece of cardboard, so that you have lots of space to fit all of the figures that you cut out and drew. Now, I felt a little bit inspired by Karen Lynch. That's one of the digital collage artists we looked at earlier in the video. She had these cool outer space backgrounds. So I'm cutting right along my horizon line and I'm snipping out the sky in my original drawing. That's because I'm going to paint a much bigger outer space sky on another piece of paper. I'm using watercolor. I'm using a few techniques: wet on wet, splatter, and salt. For wet on wet, I spread water or paint across my paper, and then I take another color and tap it so that it spreads across the wet surface of the paper. Then I'll also be splattering some different spacey colors
onto my wet picture, and finally I will top it off with a little bit of salt. When that salt dries, it'll absorb some of the paint so it looks like a starry sky. I also made some planets to make my starry sky look a little bit more like outer space. And when my picture is dry, I can start to line up all of these pieces of my background and then glue them together. I'm placing my land right at the bottom of my sky picture so that I have lots of sky space to work with and lots of land space to work with. Now that my background is done, it's time for the fun part, placing my figures and objects in my ground. Remember, if the ground is the setting or the stage, these figures and objects I've cut out are the actors, the characters. And it's time to have fun playing with these figures. Try out different strange combinations. Think about, where am I going to put each figure? How are they going to interact with each other? How are they going to interact with the landscape or the setting? I don't expect to use every single figure that I cut out, but I am going to try lots of different combinations with lots of different figures to see what pops out, what's the most interesting, what's the most fun for me. I'm just having fun playing around with these characters. I am thinking a little bit about composition. Even though surrealism embraces the strange and bizarre and the random, I still want to create a nice balanced space. So I'll pay attention to where I put different figures to make sure the different areas of my picture are a little bit balanced. Once you have spent some time really playing with your figures and trying out lots of different strange, unexpected, and interesting combinations, and you've settled upon the final composition, the final setup that you like best, it's time to neatly and carefully glue your figures in place.
All right. If you followed all of our steps and paid attention to our recipe for surrealism, you should have an amazing, dreamy work of surrealist art that Salvador Dali himself would be proud of. If you are able to, please share your artwork with me on your Artsonia portfolio or some other way. And if not, bring it to our next open art studio meeting so your classmates and I can enjoy it. I can't wait to see the strange, kooky, bizarre, silly creations that you make. Before you go, there are a few recommendations I really want to share with you to help you continue learning and enjoying surrealism. They're all videos, and you can find links to them in the description with this video or on Schoology. The first one is a beautiful short film by Disney. It was actually a collaboration between Salvador Dali himself and Disney Studios. And Dali was never able to finish it, but recently Disney finished the video. It is so beautiful, so surreal, so Salvador Dali. It's called Destino, and you should definitely check it out. It's just one of my favorite things. The other video I'd like to recommend is from Art for Kids Hub. And it is a video that will teach you how to play that surrealist drawing game that I told you about earlier in the video. The game is called Exquisite Corpses, which is kind of a weird name, but it's a really fun, silly game that you can play with just 2 other people is all it takes. And Art for Kids Hub has a great video to show you how to play that game. So you can check that link out too. The last thing is a video from Tate Kids that just teaches you a little bit more about surrealism. It's a fun animated video. It's really short, and it'll just give you some more information about this awesome art movement.
All right, I hope you enjoyed learning about surrealism today and making a fantastic surrealist work of art. I am excited to explore something new with you next week. Have an amazing week. I miss you. Bye.